Hello there, Cokesbury Margate. It is Monday chapel time. Yesterday we celebrated All Saints Sunday, Holy Communion, and we continued our sermon series, The Epic of Eden, a journey through the Old Testament. In the message, we tried to meditate about what was the main purpose of the writer of the creation narrative. What was God's original intent? What was the context? What is the theological relevance for us today? Join us in this journey of discovery and revelation. Watch the message and write a comment sharing your thoughts, okay? See you next time.
As I said, I'm offering you some information that are dense and at some level difficult to process. And I want to make sure you are not listening to things that I'm not saying, because it's common. Sometimes I'm saying things, but you're hearing something else. So in order to avoid some confusion, let me just mention a few things. What's the key element that I'm repeating every Sunday? The society in the Old Testament, in the ancient times, they were organized as ours. No, they were tribes, right? We are a bureaucratic society. We have laws, regulations, election, all that kind of stuff. They didn't have that. They had a family, clan, tribe, and nation. It was all about relationship and who was the most important person in the house. The patriarch, the oldest living male. So what I'm not saying when I share this information, I'm not saying that we should have a patriarch in our house. Okay? I'm not saying that the oldest man alive in our family should choose our career, our wives, and all that kind of stuff. Not saying that. This was then. It's not now. It doesn't have to be, okay? Because some of us sometimes are tempted to try to emulate the way they lived before. Don't need to, okay? Don't have to, and you shouldn't. Okay, so I'm not saying that. Last week I was talking about covenant, and I was introducing to you the idea that covenant is like a treaty, it's like an agreement between two parties. Okay? And the law of Moses is a treaty between God and his people. It's not like our law. What I'm not saying when I say this, the law of Moses is useless. I'm not saying that. It has its value. Do we need to follow letter by letter? No. You don't want me coming here with a goat and, right? Cutting a goat on the neck and get blood all over this place. We don't need to follow word by word, okay? But I hope I said something, and if I didn't, I'll say it now. Because when we read covenant, and that was my point, in the ancient world, covenant was the common language. People knew what they're talking about. People knew the steps. They had assumptions. It's just like this. If I tell you there's a group of people in this country that hate the idea of rising taxes, what comes to your mind? You can say it. There's a party. The Republican Party. If I say there's a group of folks who believe we should increase the taxes of the wealthy, I'm talking about assumptions. You know. So people back in the time, they would hear the covenant language, they would understand it like that. They didn't need someone like me explaining it. Okay? And that's the difference between the covenant that God makes with his people and the covenant that other nations and the other gods would do with theirs. And I think I highlighted that last week. If I didn't, I'm doing now. God introduced himself as, I am the Lord your God who delivered you from Egypt. And that's a huge difference. The God of the Bible, the God of Israel, the God Father of Jesus Christ, is a God who introduces himself as someone who does it first and explain it later. He does it on our behalf. The other gods in the other cultures, the gods require people to do something so that God can do something for them. Our God does first, and then he asks, hey, I did that for you. I want you to do this. And as long as you do this, I'll continue to do that for you. Does that make sense? Okay. So why I'm saying all these things? Because the key element to understand the Old Testament is to what I'm doing here is to teach you about context, contextual information, meaning the information that would make immediate sense to people living in ancient times, that doesn't make any sense to us now, and also finding out the values, and we use a big word, theological values that do make sense for us now, that do have application in our lives now. Am I understood? That's the challenge when we read the Old Testament, to identify elements that are culturally appropriate for that time, and then find the meanings, finding the meat, finding the soup that makes sense to our spiritual life now. Okay? All right. With that being said, what about the Eden? What about creation? What's the importance of understanding it contextually, culturally, and then expanding to our world? I don't know if you ever noticed, but when you read Genesis 1, verse 1 until Genesis 2, verse 3, that's the whole creation narrative. Funny enough, at Genesis 2, verse 4, begins a whole different narrative. I won't get into details. I will ask you to believe me, but if you're not, you can check on Google or something. But I'll just give you one piece of information, because now you're looking at me, Pastor, what you're saying, you're denying the Bible. I'm not denying the Bible. I'm trying to explain it. We'll give you one piece of information. What we read in the first narrative, men and women are created together at the same time. Humankind is created at the same time. On Genesis 2, we have first Adam, and then we have Eve. Not important to dive into it. Just highlighting there is a different narrative. Why? Because whoever was writing it, they had an intention to communicate something to that people in that time. So they wrote it down like that. Okay? I know you're freaking out, aren't you? Don't worry about it. Now I'm telling you, I'm going to try to tell you why it happened like that. Do you remember where Abraham came from? Ur. What was the culture of Ur? Ur was in Mesopotamia, right? What was the culture? They had one God or many gods? Many gods. Then you have the people of Israel living in Egypt for 400 years, and Moses leaves Egypt with them. What was the culture of Egypt? One God or many? Many gods. What is one of the first commandments we read in Exodus 20? Don't worship other gods. There was an important theme, because the only people, the only nation who had one God was the Hebrew nation. The Hebrew nation. And I wrote it down to read to you. I won't read it because it will get long. But I was reading some of the creation narratives from different religions. And it's interesting to notice how similar they are with the Genesis narrative at some point. If you read one of them, it's the Babylonian narrative. It even says that, I won't remember those names, let's say God A and God B. No, they say that the word, the earth, had no form, it was just water. And then out of the swirling of the water, two gods were created. And then out of those two gods, lesser gods, lower gods were created. If we think about Greek mythology, what do we think? Zeus, the main gods, and the demigods, right? Half human, half gods. That was the mindset of that area. Okay? And then the lesser gods didn't like the job they had, so they had a fight, they had a war with the main gods. And then out of that, the whole world was created, including us. There's another one from one specific place in Egypt. I couldn't read it here because it had strong language. Seriously. But it was like that. They had the main gods, the big gods, and the lesser gods. And then the lesser god had a rebellion against the big ones. Why? Because these lesser gods in that culture, they were slaves of the big gods. And they had an idea to avoid war, Ralph. You know what they did? Let's create humankind, and they will be our slaves. That's one of the narratives of creation in Egypt. And again, if you really study it, you'll see similar language with the Bible. Am I saying that the Bible has just a random narrative? No. But I'm saying that there's a purpose on that narrative. What is not the purpose of Genesis? Genesis was not written to give us a scientific explanation about the creation of the world. Genesis was not written to tell us if dinosaurs existed or not. That was not the point. The point was this. We have a God that existed before everything was created. And He created by saying it with His word. He said things were created. That's how powerful our God is. And after He created all that, He created humankind to rule over everything He created with freedom. No strings attached. We were not created to be slaves. Something else that the Genesis is talking about, Linda read it. God would come and see and meet with Adam and Eve every day. Because this powerful God, this awesome God who created everything, He loves His creation. He doesn't abuse His creation. He doesn't oppress His creation. He wants to be in relationship with His creation, in perfect harmony with His creation. So you see, the contextual purpose of Genesis, of creation, of the creation narrative, was to tell people, hey, you fools, there's only one God. He's awesome in power. His love is great. And He wants to live with us. He guides us. He comforts us. He gives us freedom to do whatever we want. And the only thing he asks is, don't eat from that fruit. Now, do you remember what the serpent said to Eve to convince her that she should eat that? What else? And you will be like God. And you will know things just like God. In other words, you will be a semi-God. And then what happened? If that was true, what will happen? This unique God becomes just another God, just like the other ones. You see? Isn't that beautiful? I think it's beautiful. That was the contextual purpose. Folks, we have a unique God protecting us. Let us follow him. Let us obey him. Because no one else is like him. No one else can love like him. And that's the theological message of the Genesis. You know, some people believe, and that's okay, that the world was created in 7 days, just like the Bible said. That's okay. Some people believe that between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2, it had a gap of billions of years. There are many theories out there. Not my point. My point is, I want you to be able to read the Bible, to understand it as it is, and then find the revelation of God, because that's the beauty about God. God created everything. Does he need to tell us anything? Does he need to convince us about anything? No, but he chooses to reveal himself to us in many different ways. And the most important way is through the Bible. God wants to live with us. He wants to be part of our daily lives, just like he was doing with Adam and Eve. God wants to be present in our lives, and that's one of the most important theological values of the creation narrative. And guess what? What do we celebrate here during Holy Communion? Do you know? We celebrate the presence of God in our lives. Isn't that beautiful? This is a testament. This is a statement saying, I did everything for you so that you could live with me with no barriers, with no restrictions. I did everything I could so you could be free and freely choose to live under my wings. That's the message of the Bible in a short sentence, in my opinion. God created us because he loved us. God redeemed us because he loves us. God did everything because he wants you and I to experience his presence every single day.